Here in this video I would like to do an explanation of alternative spaces and the alternative spaces that we've studied this year in class. The work that we've done has included our own research, doing a presentation on alternative spaces in our own sort of areas that we've chose to research, and also that we've produced our own show in groups. I was involved with the Dick Dwibble's murder mystery party. There's more information on that in other videos, so I won't talk too much about that show. But that was the example of the alternative space that we did. And what I will say briefly about that is that we, in choosing the location, it was performed in one of the cast members' homes. Was that not only did we perform it outside of a theatre, because there's more to alternate spaces than just not doing it in a theatre, we chose somewhere that was relevant and specific to the performance, because the performance or the story took place in a home, so we chose to perform it there, making it more relevant and arguably more realistic, more naturalistic. So to talk about what we've studied, we've looked at the changing use of theatres, of theatre locations, in performance and theatre over the sort of the course of, well, of all theatrical history, but more specifically the late 19th to the early 20th century and on, when it's skyrocketed with lots of innovative people looking for different places to do it, which links heavily in with our performance research module, but I've talked about that in a different video. Go there for that information. But what's happened is that in trying to, but becoming very innovative and exploring the limits of theatre and performance, and there's another distinction, is that we've gone from the word theatre to the word performance, because the definition now has become very broad, and it's arguable that a lot of these things aren't theatre. They're different things. That Dick Dwibble's, again, that we did, was that theatre? Was that a play? Because the audience participated in arguably the audience was part of the cast, so it's hard to say that that's theatre. So we use the word performance, which is slightly more vague in a lot of these things. For an example of a traditional theatre, we could have the O2 Arena, and lots of these national theatres, which generally look the same. They have a stage, whether raised or not, and then they have the seats all around, and sometimes balconies. And these have always been used for in European theatres. They look very similar to the ancient Greek theatres that we used, and today they are used in even more types of performances. Bands now use these arenas or theatres. Comedians use them. Lee Evans has performed at the O2 Arena, and so on. Lots of schools now have these theatres built in for school plays and stuff, because it is the norm and it is the way theatre is performed. But theatre practitioners, being an innovative lot and not want to stay still for too long, have pushed to use different locations. Festivals do this very heavily. I would draw my own experience when I went to the Prague Fringe Festival, that I went to see a brilliant show that was shot in a bedroom. That's even crazier than Dick Double's doing it in a house. It was in a bedroom, and it was a very small bedroom. The seats probably took up the majority of it for the audience, and then people were stood. And then the man who performed it had this small table, and he was blocked in as well, and he had this little bit of room to interact. I personally prefer these small locations because they're more intimate and you can interact with the audience. I personally don't like large theatres for that reason. If we go away from theatre, as I say, stand-up comedians, Lee Evans performed at the O2 Arena. Well, I don't see why you would even want to go to that gig, because he's so far away and you're watching him on the screen anyway. I know Alan Carr has said he specifically likes to work in small arenas. Anyway, I'm getting off the point of theatre. But that's one example. Festivals do it in all sorts of places. I could go on and on. You know, you'll find them done on sheds in the streets. I've heard of shows being done in cars and so on. That's one I would really like to try. If you had a play that takes place in a car, then do it in a car. And I love the idea of the relevancy of the place you do it. You don't take the theatre, which is meant to be a blank stage, and then transform it into one. Another example, which you could say goes in both camps, it's arguable whether it's traditional or not, would be black boxes, which are small black rooms that have nothing in them. You can bring chairs in if you want for the audience, but they don't have to be. They could be anything. They have more creativity than theatres, but they are used a lot. So that's debatable whether they're traditional or not. To go to a specific case that we looked at to do a presentation to the class, I was in a group that did a presentation on the living theatre. These were related heavily to the happenings that came about in the 1950s and 1960s in the United States, and they were an anarchist group who performed incredibly alternative and strange plays. To use the word plays is quite difficult, actually, whether you can say that they were plays. They were more like rituals, heavily influenced probably by Antonin-Artaud. And they would have the audience come in, and when you watch them, they are just ritual. They're actions done, and they are there to invoke this response. But they're not telling a story. They're not doing a performance really, and this obviously relates to their anarchic ideology, to not be constrained and to have the community coming together and creating this thing, and that seems to be a common thread in performance in alternative spaces, that the performance then becomes alternative. The living theatre, which I mentioned, does, Dick Dwibbles does, which we've already talked about. Although when we were brainstorming ideas for the Dick Dwibbles show, something I was really inspired by was when I went to see York Dungeons, which I don't think even tries to pretend it's a show or a theatre, but it was so close to what we were describing that I couldn't help be inspired by it. The idea that you go into this place that pretends to be somewhere, and then you lead the audience through and you interact with them. You don't pretend the audience aren't there; they're part of it. Is just a really exciting idea, and I can see why it's moved the theatrical world, and it's going to keep pushing and trying new things. And I hope that I can keep pushing and trying new things on this course and then beyond when I put on more shows.